And I think it's that lack of ways to unpack the suitcases overlapping collections of functions that the everyday words point to that has made psychology very difficult and neurology difficult. Another trouble is that whatever the mind is, it's very complicated, or rather, it's a system with all sorts of very complicated processes. And before 1950, there weren't any good terms for describing features of complicated processes. What changed was that around 1950, we were able to make complicated processes by programming computers. And within a decade or two, several hundred new words appeared. And these new words described ideas about complicated machines, most of which had never occurred to anyone, that there could be such distinctions. So a great distinction is the difference between compiler and interpreter. I've talked to a lot of neuroscientists, and a lot of the younger ones know about the difference between a compiler and an interpreter. And I suspect that many higher level mental processes involve interpreters. That is, somewhere you've stored some structure that corresponds to a string of symbols or expressions, and then there's another process that can convert that into a sequence of actions. But what happened in the 1950s and 60s is several hundred new words appeared for ideas about not just processes in general, but the kinds you might expect to find in a brain. And for example, in memory, how do you remember something? You might store it in a list structure, or and where do you store it? You might, in this kind of machine, which I presume is a G4, it probably has 3 or 4 levels of cache, 2 of which are sort of public, and then inside the central processor, there are things called registers, which keep. How many registers is in a PC these days? Anybody know?
In G4, about most of the AMDs have something like 64 or 128.
Okay. In the early days of computers, there were 2, and then there were 8 and 16, and then after that, nobody thought about it because people stopped learning machine code, and only the compiler writers knew what was actually going on. Here's a question that John McCarthy once asked. There are lots of theories of how knowledge is represented and how you retrieve it, but he asked, do you know Bill Clinton's phone number?